Hello, everybody. My name is Donna Quo, and I am a board-certified psychiatric and family nurse practitioner. Welcome to the Brighten Up podcast, where we pull up the shades and shine the light on mental health topics, both affecting and improving the lives of families. Please welcome today our special guest, Ashley McIntyre, clinical nutrition expert, holistic health coach, and founder of the Elevated Plate, to today's Brighten Up podcast. Ashley routinely helps busy individuals feel better and get back to themselves through food and lifestyle modifications. Her mission is to encourage and inspire positive lifestyle changes that lead to elevated health by listening to the goals of her clients and meeting them where they are at. She envisions a community where health is a destination and personalized nutrition is the vehicle. How cool is that statement? Health is a destination and your vehicle is nutrition. I think that is brilliant and so true on so many levels. You are what you eat, for sure. The topic of this podcast is your brain on food. We're very lucky to have Ashley here today to share her expertise and discuss nutrition and diet, and how that affects how we feel every day, our energy levels, how that affects different struggles, mental health struggles, and we'll break those down a little bit more into categories as we move on in the podcast. So thank you for being here today, Ashley.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start by asking you just to please tell us a little bit more about yourself and what inspired you to pursue a career as a holistic health coach and nutrition expert.
Thank you again for having me. I actually went to school initially at the University of Florida, go Gators, for marketing, and after school was a pharmaceutical rep for about 8.5 years. And then when I had children, decided to stay home with my kids. And so this is a second career and quite a pendulum switch from, selling drugs basically to using food as medicine. And
what type of drugs were you selling, if you don't mind me asking? What industry in the?
I was all over the place. So I did like Advair for asthma, Flonase, which is like for allergies. And then I ended in the oncology space doing like breast cancer, which was pretty cool. But in terms of when COVID hit, I knew that when my youngest went to kindergarten, I wanted to go back to work. And I knew I wanted to do something different and hadn't quite figured it out. And when COVID hit, I've always been passionate about nutrition, and I became very immersed in research trying to make sure to keep my family healthy. Like, how could we do that through food? And it became kind of like an obsession, and it turned into going back to school for health coaching and then a master's in clinical nutrition. And here I am now, started a nutrition consultation practice, the Elevated Plate, and I'm finishing up my clinical hours. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
A great concept, the Elevated Plate. Really, Elevated Plate yields elevated lifestyle. Happy life, happy families.
Exactly.
Nutrition and this topic as it pertains to mental health has definitely been gaining traction and a growing field of study, more and more so with each passing year. There was recently a reputable journal, the Lancet Psychiatry Journal, was quoted as saying diet is as important to psychiatry and mental health as it is to cardiology, endocrinology, and gastroenterology. So it's not only just you have diabetes, you have to watch your diet, or you have reflux, don't eat anything spicy, or maybe you have hypothyroidism or you have high cholesterol, watch your diet. Now we're really opening the conversation surrounding mental health and various conditions and how one's diet may affect those conditions or the outcome of treatment. So what has been your experience with guiding clients on their nutritional needs who are living with, I'll name just a few of the most common mental health conditions, such as depression, anxiety, mood disorders. I know this is a lot. I'm really picking your brain. Autism or ADHD.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. There was, in terms of looking at research that's shown that food can really affect our mental health status, the American Journal of Psychiatry actually published an article on nutrition, and they stated it is both compelling and daunting to consider that dietary intervention at an individual or population level could reduce rates of psychiatric disorders. So, we don't have all the information yet, but from the data that we've had from the studies that have been done in general, before we get into some of these like disease states that you mentioned, food first and foremost, in general, it's reduce some of the sugar because there's sugar in so much that we aren't even aware of that we're consuming. And let's reduce the processed foods that we're eating. So in general, if we just consume a whole food diet, that's what we're looking at, and getting down to kind of just going back to foods that are grown and that our grandparents ate and not things that are in boxes. There's kind of 4 things. So I would say food first and foremost. Second, inflammation. And that can come in so many different forms. So it's personalized. It could be from over-exercising. It could be that you have a lot of chronic diseases. There's so many things that can cause inflammation in our body. So that's a personalized one, but we definitely need to reduce the inflammation. And then stress, which obviously can lead to inflammation, is another one that's really important. There are so many chronic stressors like fatigue, insomnia, if you have frequent illnesses, a client's perceived state of stress too. And then the 4th one I think is the most important, and that's really your gut. Because, like Hippocrates said, he said all disease begins in the gut. And while he didn't have the data that we have now to support that, he was right. What he didn't realize is that there is a 9-lane highway that runs from your gut to your brain, and a 1-lane highway, your gut-brain axis, that runs from your brain to your gut. So what that really means is that what happens in the gut doesn't stay in the gut, and that we need to consider this, especially for mental health. Serotonin is made in the gut. And so if we can feed our gut, the microbes that are in our microbiome, our bacteria that's in the microbiome housed in our gut, that's like supporting it with prebiotic foods, probiotic foods, doing vagal stimulation, stuff like that, then that can really be important for mental health. And, I don't know if you have specific questions around the other kind of disease states for mental health, like anxiety, depression. I definitely have recommendations that are more specific for those.
Yes, I would love to, break them down a little bit. I know we could probably have a whole podcast and really divide this specifically, which we will in the future. We're just skimming the surface today on these topics as an introduction on these various diagnoses. But just to comment on the serotonin production in the gut, I mean, that's really when patients are started or are on a medication for depression or anxiety, that's a common initial side effect that we counsel them on, is that you might notice just a little bit of nausea the first 2 or 3 days of starting an antidepressant, because it is stimulating that serotonin production that is in the gut as well. So really just highlighting that point of how important a healthy gut is and microbe production. So that's a good way to put it as far as like the illustration with the highways.
And for the listeners, there's like a diagram that I wish I could show you that really portrays it, but it's basically the highway really describes it, the 9-lane highway from the gut to the brain. And so what happens in the gut just doesn't stay there. And we just need to be mindful of that with mental health.
And it is really like these other autoimmune disease states, because really things like diabetes and hypothyroidism, they often come together with people as coexisting conditions, and they are autoimmune conditions, and the role that inflammation plays in that. And I think it's really the same is true with mental health. So.
Oh, for sure. So specifically looking like at, you had mentioned anxiety and depression, and those, while they are separated, kind of the overarching goals with clients that I work with would be focusing on blood sugar control, number one. When we eat something, whether it's sugar-based, like ice cream or a cookie, or whether it's mainly carbohydrates, just like eating some crackers or pasta, it turns into glucose in our blood, and that spikes our blood glucose levels. And so if we are constantly having these peaks and valleys, that leads to inflammation. And so that leads to a cascade of events in our body. And so if we can control our blood sugar, it really makes us feel more steady. We don't feel like this rush of energy and this total like slump of energy when it falls. If we can eliminate any food triggers, which can be done by testing it out yourself for 4 to 6 weeks, or there's food sensitivity testing that can be done. But gluten and eggs, for both of those, have been shown that, not with every client because it's personalized, but that can be beneficial. And reducing or eliminating caffeine, sugar, and alcohol as well. So those are kind of like some of the overarching ones with clients that have anxiety or depression, that those are kind of like the big things that we would want to work on first. And then there's like little things that you can work on, like specifically with anxiety, adding in fish with omega-3s, or specifically with depression, looking at nutrient deficiencies like zinc, selenium, chromium, and magnesium, and making sure that we're actually eating foods that have those in them and that we're not deficient, because that can lead to depression. So those are kind of like some overarching things. And then the other thing that I don't think most people realize is that not only is protein important for bone health and for our muscles, protein is really important because it contains the building blocks amino acids that are needed to make neurotransmitters that, if we don't have those, they can lead to anxiety and depression. So, for instance, if we're not taking in enough protein, we're going to not have enough tryptophan, which leads to low serotonin and depression. And then again, if we're not eating enough protein, we're not going to have enough amino acid phenylalanine, which can lead to low dopamine and depression. And, the food sources for those are not always meat, but they are, you want to make sure you have enough protein in your diet so that your body can make those neurotransmitters. That's kind of like part of the pathway.
Absolutely. It's an important staple and an important consideration with the people, especially that might follow vegetarian diets, just looking for those alternate sources of protein and making sure that they have the adequate amount needed to maintain a healthy brain function.
For sure. And it doesn't mean that if I have a client that's vegan or vegetarian that I'm trying to get them to eat meat, because that's not fair. That's right. Sometimes it's a ethical belief. Like I work with my clients based upon what's important to them. And if that's important to them, we'll find other ways. You can get it from tofu and nuts and seeds and quinoa and legumes, and we can get it from other places. We just have to be more mindful and teach the client to be more mindful when they're curating their plate.
Sure. I think another important vitamin to consider is vitamin D. For our listeners living in colder climates during the winter, those levels are often low, or maybe not even that low. Maybe they're in the middle somewhere. But that really can wreak havoc with depression and anxiety, especially during the colder months. Yeah. And interestingly, even in some warmer climates, I met a gentleman that really had a severe case of COVID, was hospitalized from Florida, and he's outside most every day. He is a contractor, so he spends a lot of his time working on homes and doing things outside. And he was hospitalized and found to have a very low vitamin D level, but he also had a diet very high processed diet, which I understand can actually block the absorption of vitamin D, even if you are out in the sunshine quite a bit. You can almost reverse that. Have you come across that or seen that?
No, I haven't, but there's like a couple things that play with vitamin D, and I'm glad you brought it up. And I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but there have been lots of studies since COVID came out looking at vitamin D and having an inverse relationship with COVID death. So if your levels are too low, not that there is a causation, but there is a correlation between having really low vitamin D levels and when COVID was at its peak, and the death rate with that when their levels were very low. But in terms of vitamin D, I feel like we're all scared a little bit of the sun because of sun cancer and wrinkles and all the things.
Yes.
So we're all wearing these sun protective shirts. We're all wearing sunscreen. So even though you and I both live in Florida, we probably aren't getting enough vitamin D from the sun. Getting it through diet, kind of going back to gut health, if your gut can't absorb it because you're having some sort of absorption issue, then your levels are going to be low. So if levels are low, it may be from diet. It's probably not from sun. It could be from an absorption issue as well.
How do you work with clients who present with you that are concerned about a potential absorption issue? What is some testing you would recommend, or some symptoms that you might look for that might alert you to
It wouldn't be if they were just low on like vitamin D, but their other levels and their symptoms were fine. It would be more like, okay, well, maybe we need to supplement with vitamin D. It would be if they really, a lot of their levels were low. So if,
Okay.
looking at B12, if we're looking at they're having like, they don't have maybe enough stomach acid to break down their food. There's like a lot of different variables. There's stool tests that can be done, but there's not, I guess, one pathway. It would have to be almost personalized by a client basis.
And that's how you would assess really where they were at with their microbe health when they came to see you. You would order a panel of different tests just to look at really the levels and
it would be based upon their symptoms too, and the client's budget if they're able to afford to do tests, or if we're going to be like, just like I said earlier with foods to eliminate for certain like depression. So if it's in their affordability to run a food sensitivity test, great. But also, let's just remove it for like 4 weeks and see if you see a difference, right?
Sure.
That's it's free to do that, just to remove dairy or to remove gluten for 4 weeks and see if that makes a difference. Because if it doesn't make a difference, then I would hate to remove, especially dairy, because that's, people can get calcium from a lot of places, but people are very concerned about getting their calcium from dairy. And then I don't like to remove a food group unless it's a true sensitivity that is affecting your mental health or affecting some other portion of your health.
That's great advice, and I agree. It is free, and there are common villains in the food groups that really can aggravate these symptoms, like gluten especially, and
Sure.
and for some folks, dairy. Another diagnosis that really has increased in prevalence has been young children diagnosed with autism is significantly on the rise. That also has some inflammation component as well, and oftentimes with that population they have several actually food aversions and texture issues. Have you worked with any clients or experienced any situations with children or adults living with autism dealing with those specific concerns surrounding their nutrition and food?
I have not had a client yet or worked with a child with autism. I know that from grad school, it's complex and it involves dysfunction kind of at the cellular level, which is why an optimal diet is the foundation. But like you said, it's tricky because they have so many, they're very sensitive to what they will and will not eat. B12 is really important for those clients from food sources. Folate, again, from like green leafy vegetables can be helpful. And then anything that's colorful that's going to have like micronutrients and polyphenols in it, colorful fruits and veggies for, their antioxidant source is important. There's glutathione is like kind of our master antioxidant. It's really important for detoxification and kind of being able to rid our body of the toxins that it doesn't need. And eating something like broccoli sprouts and sprinkling that on a salad if they're going to eat it can be really beneficial. These clients, unfortunately, they usually present with gastrointestinal disorders. And so gut dysbiosis, kind of again, going back to the gut, is increasingly documented with them. So working on helping them with their gut, a specific probiotic for autism, would be a good recommendation. But that's kind of like the all-encompassing kind of looking at different factors and then working with that specific client to see, well, you don't like that food that has, vitamin B12. What about these other foods? Do you like any of these? Can we get these in throughout the day or throughout the week?
So with vitamin B12 being a champion specifically for autism and
folate,
like you said, and folate, and creating that personalized plan.
For sure.
And there has even been situations with stem cell and even transferring gut bacteria from people who are not autistic, who are not neurodivergent, into that population that's gaining some momentum as well.
I'm not sure if that's approved in the U.S. yet. And I could be incorrect. I thought that, sometimes we're the last to do things and get things approved, but that has been doing, what do they call it? Bacteria transfer or fecal transfer to another patient can even be helpful for many other disease states. If you're transferring in terms of the microbes that are in your gut lining, for those that aren't familiar, the more diverse, the better. So if you ate the same breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, even if they were like perfectly curated meals, you're only going to be getting those specific bacteria in your gut, and the other ones are going to die off if you're not feeding them with a variety of food. So eating a variety of food leads to a diverse microbiome and of the bacteria in your gut. And so if you take a diverse microbiome and put it in somebody that wasn't given a diverse microbiome at birth, because we get it through the birth canal that's part of like how we're like inoculated. That's how our microbiome starts. That has been shown to be beneficial, but I think that I've only seen those studies overseas, but I could be incorrect.
It's very new here
Right.
in the United States, but yes, that probably is where it's actually been performed, I think, is overseas. And I think that's a good reminder for our listeners and even our, myself is to diversify your diet. Don't necessarily eat the same things, kind of branch out, try different things to really expand your microbe exposure and develop that healthy gut.
Yeah.
One other diagnosis I really have to touch on, because it is really increasing and so prevalent, is lack of attention and focus. Symptoms of attention deficit disorder is really on the rise. And it is definitely, a true psychiatric condition that oftentimes is helped by increasing the free-floating dopamine in the front part of the brain to the right level that just helps to alleviate difficulty with concentration and follow through. I do believe some other contributing factors could be just really technology, just having a hard time maintaining attention and follow through because of that. We're just really an instantaneous culture now. We like things quick. We don't like lengthy letters. We text. It's just a different time period. So it's interesting talking with people who are self-medicating with a lot of caffeine to get through their day through energy drinks. And, I talked to somebody, I think, that has 12 Diet Pepsis a day.
Wow.
Literally. So what is your advice for caffeine intake and also for people formally diagnosed living, with ADHD and supplementing with medication for dopamine?
For caffeine intake in general, there's like a bunch of pillars that I think are really important to health. Sleep is one of them. So I don't think caffeine is bad by any means, but if you're drinking it so late in the day that it's affecting your sleep, then you're just like chasing yourself, like it's like a dog chasing its tail. Like you just never win. You're not getting enough sleep, you're over caffeinating, you're not getting enough sleep, you're over caffeinating, and you're just spiraling. So I think sleep is first foremost paramount. So if having that second cup of coffee at 3 p.m. is going to mess up your sleep, then let's stop before noon. So I think that's just in general. Caffeine can be useful for ADHD clients, and you would have to work with your physician. I would never take a ADHD client off of their medication, but you can replace it with like a stimulant type medication and see if that works for you. Now at those levels that you're talking about, the friend that drinks all of the Diet Pepsis or Cokes all day long, processed food. So let's get back to real food. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's definitely way too much caffeine. 2 cups a day, I would say, is probably of some version of caffeine is probably the most that, we need, because that's probably all you can get in before 11 or 12, which is when I usually tell my clients to cut it off. So it's not terrible for health. It's just, it depends on if it's affecting your sleep, and it might actually help an ADHD client focus a little more. But in terms of those ADHD clients, we want to avoid or limit sugar and artificial colors and preservatives. Hydration is really important for those clients. And then if their budget allows, eating organic foods is really important. And that's, it depends on what they have available to them, but organic can be important for those clients, getting out any of the pesticides or anything that might, contribute to their ADHD.
What about dopamine enhancing foods? Are there any that you can think of that might actually help with that production, so to speak?
Going back when I was talking about protein and getting those amino acids to make those, happy neurotransmitters. So phenylalanine rich food sources would be like meat, fish, eggs, cheese, nuts and seeds, quinoa and legumes. And then if you're not glucose sensitive, wheat, oats, rye, and barley, and then soy and tempeh as well. Those can all be those are all higher sources of phenylalanine, and then that's what leads to the production of dopamine, kind of like the cascading chain. And if you don't have enough, that is something that can contribute to both depression and anxiety as well.
Sure. What's your favorite recipe that you might provide somebody?
I'm a bowl person because I feel like whether it's my own picky family or whether we're having other friends and family over for dinner, I tend to make a lot of bowls for dinner because then people can put what they want in their bowl. So whether we're having like zucchini noodles, maybe we're having some lentil or chickpea pasta or some rice, that being the base, and then we're having meat or seafood on top. We add in some cheese. I always like toasted almonds. That's like my go-to because I think they taste delicious. Or you can add sesame seeds or something to your bowl. Legumes, for anyone that's not familiar with like the blue zones, it's something to Google afterwards, but it's, there are 5 blue zones in the world, and that's where Dan Buettner has discovered that there are the most centenarians, which are people over 100 that are concentrated. And one of the benefits that he found that these blue zones hold is that they eat a lot of legumes. So I always try to get those in my diet. They're a great fiber source as well. So to kind of just create a bowl and to try to get some of those. And if you're eating a bowl like that, get some green leafy veggies. And then I always say anything with color that will get more micronutrients in your diet. And that's typically not how I eat every night, but that's just what I tend to go towards because then people can pick and choose what they prefer and don't prefer. And I have like an adaptable, I call it an adaptable quinoa salad on my website that, kind of does that. And there's different versions of things that you can throw in. I like quinoa because it's a good protein source as well. And if you make it with bone broth, it has even more protein in it if you're not a vegan. But it's a really great protein source to start a base with.
And they're really fun to make. I mean, they're colorful, they're bright, they're delicious. You can have, some warmer, maybe, whole grain rice or quinoa there with whatever protein, sometimes a little bit of chicken, and top it with some gorgeous multicolored vegetables.
Exactly.
I mean, it's awesome.
Exactly.
It's a great idea. Really speaks to the rising replacement of a lot of fast food restaurants as having those options available. Like Core Life is one that I can think of that makes bowls a business in the Northeast, actually. And I know there's a few. Healthy Kitchen, I think, close to us is another restaurant that does the same thing. So very cool. And lastly, just on this as well, when you spoke about the omega-3s, it's very interesting that the incidence of mental health conditions such as bipolar disorder, mood dysregulation are really low in countries that consume a lot of fish, like Asian countries. So definitely a protective factor with keeping inflammation down and managing symptoms.
It's definitely anti-inflammatory. The U.S., the averages that I've seen is that the ratio of omega-3 fatty acids to omega-6 is 1 to 10. And the goal would be to have it more like 1 to 4. So you're consuming omega-6s and much more omega-3s. And unfortunately, our foods that are processed are so laden with those omega-6 fatty acids. That's why we have such a higher consumption in the United States. It's just we eat so much processed food, whereas not only do they eat less processed food in like Asian countries, they're also, like you said, eating a lot more fish. It's like the double whammy, and so their levels are more in a more optimal place for optimal health.
I'm sure it makes for interesting international nutrition conferences and how we're going to guide our country and our kids and future generations on diet. I mean, I think we're going to have to really take a better look and implement some changes really at the first level of production. And
I think that has a lot to do with just educating people that your food choices, not just, on Christmas Day, right? It's not just eating cookies and having celebration stuff. It's the stuff that you do day in and day out. They can make a huge impact in your health later on. And if we're educated in that, then we can vote with our fork. And if we're you're right. Or I shouldn't say vote with our fork, vote with our wallet, right?
Right.
So if we're putting our money in buying whole foods, then that's where, the focus is going to go, versus if everyone's buying as a collective more processed foods, then obviously there's going to be more processed foods on the shelf and less options. So just like I feel like there's more gluten sensitivities that people have found, and there's a lot more gluten-free options. But just because it's in a gluten-free processed, just gluten-free crackers are really just the same as regular crackers. They just don't have gluten in them. Doesn't mean that they're better for you.
It doesn't mean that they're not processed.
Right.
Yes, yes. And that especially rang true this past summer. I spent some time in Portugal, and my kids and I went out for pizza one night, and the crust was just so wonderfully moist and fresh and delicious. And when we picked up the piece of pizza, there was not any grease on the plate. It just was really very clean. And come to find out after talking with some of Europeans and some of the natives that the gluten content in European countries is just not, there's no comparison to what we have here and how we process wheat.
For sure. And a lot of people that have gluten sensitivities in America can go to Europe and they can eat pizza without a problem, because it's just so much more highly processed, and there's been so many modifications, I guess, to the actual grain that ours is so processed versus theirs is much more whole and unprocessed, and it's just easier for people to digest.
And people are even ordering from Europe once they return here to the States. They're ordering pizza crust and importing certain wheat derivatives to make things, from Europe. So that's really interesting. And I think that needs to kind of get on. We have to have more of a conversation about that, especially as it correlates with the rising statistics in mental illness and struggles and suicidality and all the issues we're facing as a country. That would be drug addiction. That would be an important, really doable intervention as well. So I hope that leaders like yourself are able to continue to educate people, and even at a political level.
Oh, for sure. I agree.
It is really crazy just especially with families. You have 3 kids, I have 4 kids. It seems like we live in our cars sometimes. We're always on the go. We always everybody has to be someplace, sometime different. Or maybe we eat dinner as a family twice a month based on busy work schedules and different commitments. How would you recommend, in a culture where we have Chick-fil-A at every corner, which actually is probably not too bad if you get the grilled nuggets, you can make healthier choices. There are options. How do you encourage families or clients who might be resistant to making dietary changes because they're too busy or because it's just too hard?
I think in terms of those clients, what's key is planning. So if what is the saying? If you don't plan, then you can't achieve the goal. There's a saying, and I'm blanking on it right now, but I think planning really is key. I always encourage clients Sunday, just because it's the day before the week starts, to plan it out with your significant other and your kids, like what's on the schedule, who needs to be where, and then plan out those nights. Okay, well, we're all going to be home on Tuesday, so I'll make this pot of chili and I'm going to double it so we can have it on Wednesday, and just kind of plan out the week. And then, okay, what are we going to do for breakfast? Should I go ahead on Sunday and make a batch of chia pudding and throw it in the fridge so we can all, have it for breakfast on Monday and Tuesday, and be able to kind of plan it out? Because when my clients struggle the most is when they leave the house and they have no idea what they're eating for the day, because then it leads to, well, I don't have time. And then by the time they have time to eat, they're starving. And then we don't make the choices that are going to be beneficial for health. No one does. It's like, don't go to the grocery store when you're hungry.
Right.
You know what I mean? You'll buy everything.
That. Yes. Or the chocolate covered almonds, not the dark chocolate, the milk. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you can plan and replace any of those to-go meals, as much as possible. So we're eating more of those whole foods. That's great. Home delivery kits or home delivery meals are also a great alternative, again, for those that can afford to do those, because they can be slightly more expensive, but then they're all done for you. And some of them, I do have some clients that, live alone, so they don't want to cook these big meals, and you can just get a single portion already made meal too. And so that can be really easy, and some of them are very tasty and pretty useful to put in place for stuff like that.
Absolutely. I'm thinking of one called Factor that my neighbor orders and uses to feed her family of only 3 people right now, but a great option for really somebody older living on their own.
And a lot of them have they'll have different meal plans. So if you go on and say I need something that's more heart healthy, or because you have cholesterol or blood sugar issues, or maybe you need something that's more blood sugar friendly because you have prediabetes or diabetes. And so if you click that, then they really can make life more simple. And, as a nutrition expert, I can help recipes and stuff like that for those that do have the time. But like you said, not everyone has the time to sit down and cook a meal from soup to nuts,
Absolutely. But I think planning is key. Having healthy snacks, water at your fingertips.
I always have snacks in the car.
Hunger, a lot of people get really angry when they're hungry. Yes, exactly. And that can be quite disruptive. And they'll just run in to a drugstore and just grab a huge candy bar or a big bag of chips. And once you do that, you pretty much have kind of spiked your blood glucose and can kind of have that whole cascade of symptoms of.
And then you're leading towards inflammation. And then if you're doing that on a regular basis, if we do that every now and then, it's no big deal, right? It's the habits that we do day in and day out. So if that's our normal, then down the line, you're going to have, higher A1C levels because your sugars are going up and down too much. And
nothing changes if nothing changes, right?
Exactly.
Isn't that true?
Yes.
Speaking of hydration, can you touch on what your recommendation is for water consumption and hydration, and for people that don't really like water, what alternatives you might suggest, and how that affects your brain and your mental health?
Sure. So in general, I recommend about half your body weight in ounces. So, because it really is dependent. A 250-pound male should drink way more than a 100-pound female. You can't just, so it's based upon body weight. So about half your body weight in ounces. There actually was a large study from 2018 that actually found an inverse relationship between plain water consumption and depression. So the more that you're hydrated, the lower incidence. And again, this is a correlation, not a causation, but of depressive symptoms. It's, really key for health, especially living in Florida where it's so hot. We may even have to consume a little bit more than that half body weight in ounces. The heat and making sure we're replenishing electrolytes. It can be used as a weight management tool by consuming 2 cups of water before a meal. That's been shown to have 44% greater weight loss than when you don't do it, because you're filling up your stomach and you can't, consume as much. So it can be used as a weight management tool, but it's really important. And I think people don't realize how much water can play into migraines. Water can play, if you're dehydrated, your blood sugar levels can spike higher than they normally would than if you were hydrated. And in terms of how to make it taste good, I would avoid artificial sweeteners. They're not bad. Monk fruit is probably one of the better ones, but especially talking about blood sugar issues, they can still spike blood sugar even though they're a sugar alternative. There's been studies that have shown that. Usually not at the time that you take them, but it's later in the day.
That's really interesting. I did not know that. And I did not know dehydration could really worsen blood sugar spikes, for people that are following low sugar keto diets.
Mm-hmm. And then people, and if in terms of our detoxification system and our body getting rid of toxins, if we're not drinking enough water, then we're not having daily bowel movements. And you don't want food to sit in your colon for that long, because once your body has absorbed what it needs, then what's left over is bowel movement. And those toxins need to leave our system. Like we don't want them sitting in us forever. So that's part of like, you need to have a proper detoxification pathway, and making sure that we're hydrated so that we don't impair that is really important. It can lead to a lot of, issues.
Sure. So half your body weight in ounces.
Yep, that's the general recommendation. And if you're going to make it taste better, use fruit like lime, lemon, orange. A cheap electrolyte replacement would be just squeezing lemon and doing like some sea salt or some Celtic salt in your water to kind of replenish. There's so many different ones that are out there now that are expensive, and some of them can be overly expensive. I don't know how to, but in terms of if you're just looking for something easy to do after a workout, that's what I would recommend.
Okay. And I always, if I'm at a nice fancy restaurant, I always opt for the tap water. What are your thoughts on like the different types of water? There's alkaline, there's purified, there's tap water. I mean, I know in Florida, we have to be a little bit, from what I've heard, the tap water is not the best, but maybe I'm wrong. Please.
So really the best and not the cheapest would be to get like spring water in a glass container, because then you're not getting the plastics from the plastic bottle, and spring waters have lots of minerals in them. So that's like if you've gone down a rabbit hole. For people that are just living everyday life, I do recommend getting some sort of filter on either your faucet in your kitchen or maybe on your fridge. If you want to spend extensive amounts of money and do your whole house, you can. But I just do one on my refrigerator I don't like reverse osmosis because it takes everything out and actually doesn't remove fluoride, and I don't.
Can you explain what that is?
So reverse osmosis just basically takes all of the contaminants that could be in your water out, and for some reason, I don't know why, but my understanding is that fluoride is not removed, and at least where we live, fluoride is added to our water, and that's like a whole probably another podcast that you could do. So I would prefer not have fluoride in my water. It has been shown to cross the blood-brain barrier. And so with reverse osmosis, you'd actually have to do another step to remove, like another filter to remove the fluoride. And then you have to add back in minerals because it takes them out. So it makes it too sterile. You need those minerals. So I prefer, and I'm blanking on the one I have on my fridge, but it removes fluoride and a lot of the other chemicals that can be in your water. And so my whole family, we just have stainless steel water bottles that we use, and that's what we fill up and drink. And if we, obviously convenience, we get water when we're traveling and stuff like that, in plastic bottles. We have to live our life. But
yes.
In general, I do try to get filtered water that has fluoride removed and a lot of the other chemicals. And that's what I drink daily, based upon the research that I've done. And a lot of this is up until the research we have now, because research is always evolving. So
Sure.
A year or two from now, there could be more information that's released for different mental health disease states that might change the game, and we might say, oh, actually, this would be better. So it's just really where the research is today.
So a nice stainless steel collection is a great investment.
It is. And I know, glass is great too. It's just not practical because if you drop it, it's going to shatter.
Sure.
I think glass could be probably the best, but it's just not practical.
Right. Especially for kids or
Right.
playing sports and
All of that.
But definitely a step up from
Right.
plastic.
Because
So
even if the plastic water bottles say BPA free, there's so many different versions of plastics that are going to leach into your water. If you're drinking cold water, it's not as big of a concern as if you're putting like tea or coffee in something that's plastic. Then that's when it's going to leach those plastic particles probably at a higher rate because it's like melting it a little.
interesting. Where do you buy mineral water in a glass container? Where would you? Could you buy a big? Is there a water service that you can think of?
I can't think of. I don't know one off the top of my head, but there are spring water sources that you can have delivered in like those large, big barrels. I feel like when I was growing up, we always had some of those friends that had the water filter in the corner of like the dining room or the kitchen that was like the big jug tub.
Yes, that's
down.
what I'm thinking of.
So it's something like that you could do. But like I said, that is like.
That's plastic, though.
But no, that they come in glass.
They come in glass now.
They don't always. I think you can get them, but that's
okay.
So I don't know where you do that. That's another level. I'm just doing
Yes,
one on my
that's
fridge.
another level. That's a great Google search.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and I'm curious, how about educating clients about portion control and mindful eating? What are some tips that you have? You know, there's a strong component with people that might struggle, and the struggle is real with living with daily depression or anxiety or ADHD or mood dysregulation, and a common self-medication tactic, of course, is food. Grabbing something, maybe that comfort food for that individual, whatever it is, that temporarily gets them back to their a Zen state, which we know is not prolonged. But what do you recommend just for clients and their families for portion control advice and mindful eating?
So there's so many different things suggestions that I could make in terms of like the mindful, intuitive eating space. I feel like it's a lot different today than, again, it was for our grandparents, because we have a TV, we have a cell phone, we have iPads, our computers are there. So, and there's no break in a sense, especially for adults and for kids when they get home between doing homework and us doing work. There's like this constant working. And so we're constantly not paying attention while we're eating. Even at breakfast, if you have your cell phone in your hand, or you're working at your desk at lunch, or you're watching TV while you're eating dinner, we're not paying attention. And so there's a great book. It's called Intuitive Eating. It's by Evelyn Tripoli, I believe. I use the workbook, and she does a great example about talking about intuitive eating and how it's much like driving while texting. So while the driver may feel like they can drive and text, they are definitely distracted, and it is not a good idea. So it's the same thing in terms of distracted eating. So you might have the impression that you can watch TV and eat at the same time, but you're truly missing out on like the sensory aspects of eating. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I have like my weakness, and it's actually has health benefits, is dark chocolate. So I'll take out like a square or two of dark chocolate to have in the afternoon. And then before I know it, I go to have some more and it's gone. And it's because I'm sitting at my desk doing it. And so I wasn't even aware that I was eating it because I was distracted in doing work. So the more that we can remove those distractions, I've even told clients to like put out a placemat, turn on some music. In Florida, we have beautiful weather. Go sit outside. Just kind of be present, and you're not going to be in that rush state, because what can happen is that our plate will be empty and we're full, but we didn't experience all the pleasures of the meal. So we may still have this like profound desire to continue eating. Right. So a lot of it is just really focusing on just like sit down and take a breath. You know, it probably only takes 10, 15 minutes to actually eat a meal, right? And so we're really not going to miss out too much on the work or whatever it is if we just sit down and like focus on what we're eating. So there's a lot of different tactics around it, but I think that being more mindful and putting all distractions away while you eat, actually, you'll realize how fast you're eating.
Absolutely. Being present, being mindful, having just enjoying the food. Food is such a wonderful part of our culture.
Oh, for sure.
We use it to celebrate milestones and birthdays, and we should savor it and enjoy it. And I agree. If that means getting a nice plate or a nice table setting to make it more enticing and increase your awareness, or even something like a weighted blanket on your lap
that's a great idea.
Ground
I've never thought of that. Yeah.
I encourage those a lot to kids who have a hard time sitting still doing their homework. And I think it could work for really any age, just to be mindful with what you're eating and realize just those slower bites and what the reward is there and how full you feel, and without indulging excessively.
For sure. And a cool exercise to do is to take like a piece of dark chocolate, and put it in your mouth. Don't bite it. Don't try to like lick it. Like just let it sit and melt, and just kind of like really be aware of like all the flavors in the dark chocolate. And maybe you've gotten salted dark chocolate and you can actually taste the sweet and the salt at the same time, and like really be aware. It's a cool exercise, and it can make you really appreciate food a little more. And again, just, bringing your attention back to the food that you're consuming. Because it is, I hate it when people talk about diets, because it really should be a lifestyle, right? Like, let's try to not do something for January. Let's do something for, like, this is a change that I'm going to make forever, and not look for the short term, but the long term.
No elevator to success. And if you're going to do something radically for a short period, you might, eventually it's go into reverse. I think slow and steady wins the race, especially with nutrition and dietary changes.
For sure.
It's so important. And also just exposing young kids on how to eat at a young age. And we've evolved so much from when we were kids. I can remember going through a period in college where, just have pasta. Have as much pasta as you want. That's healthy, and without really alluding to what you said earlier, the breakdown of the pasta turning into sugar, being stored as fat, increasing cholesterol. So it's interesting, these different fads, but we always kind of come back to really the pillars of what comes from the ground, what comes from the earth.
Foods, right?
Right.
And, there's tips and tricks. Obviously, like you said, we can't make every meal from scratch every single day. Our life doesn't work that way. So let's plan and let's figure out how we can do the best we can with what we have.
And I know Costa Rica, I have a friend who visits Costa Rica a couple times a year and just talks about the blue zones and wanting to retire there, and just what a beautiful, healthy lifestyle it is. So that's on my bucket list to visit.
It is on my bucket list too. Haven't made it yet, but there's a direct flight out of Orlando. I think I've looked into it before.
There is. Okay. Hey, that's easy. Very easy. What about, I know that you touched on the mindful eating, the awareness. What is a generalization? I know it's different depending on really height and weight of individuals, but what do you encourage as far as portion sizes and frequency of eating or snacking? Do you recommend 3 meals? What are your thoughts on folks that are maybe intermittent fasting? That's a bigger trend right now.
Yeah, it really depends on the client's goals. If they're a male and we're trying to, mitigate some sort of cholesterol issues or weight loss, intermittent fasting might be a great idea. A lot of the studies on intermittent fasting have been done on men. There's just not a lot on women, and our hormones are very different than a man's. We are not small men.
Right.
So a lot of those tests, the reason that a lot of studies are done on men is because they don't have a menstrual cycle and there's no hormone changes. So they feel like it's easier to take that variable out of the equation by just using men. The studies that I've seen that have been done on intermittent fasting in women, especially those going through hormonal changes like perimenopause and menopause, it could just be an added stressor. So when you are fasting, it is an added stress on your body. With so many added stressors that we already have, like just stress in general or over-exercising or foods that we eat causing inflammation and stuff like that, we just don't need any more stressors on our body, and that could really put us into it could spike your cortisol, which is your stress hormone high, and it can just kind of be a cascade of events. So, and it can happen more in females. So I wouldn't say intermittent fasting is for everyone. That would be like a case-by-case basis. I do recommend that people fast between dinner and breakfast. So like no late night snack. Because allowing our body to have 12 hours of like not having to digest food and just doing, like I call them like cleaning up, like letting our cells do these cleanup processes so that then we can start again in the morning. And there's different studies that show that you should have somewhere between 3 and 5 hours between meals, just to let, again, your stomach completely get rid of the food and move it on. Because if you're continually eating, again, going back to blood sugar, your blood sugar is going to be continually high, and it's going to have those peaks and valleys. So it would really be client dependent. I know that's not a fun answer.
Right. No, it's actually,
it depends on their goals.
It's actually very helpful because we are different as women. We have menstrual cycles. We are able to have babies. Our bodies are trained differently to support that. And our metabolism often really slows down to 5 miles an hour if we deprive ourselves too much.
Right.
I think some of the newer recommendations for women have been as much as, a 20-hour fast and a 4-hour eating window, that I can see how that could be a little bit excessive,
Right.
depend on the continuum of where a woman is in her life, and actually go the other way, slow down your metabolism and make it more difficult to get to that healthy body mass index.
There's periods and there's studies that have looked at doing it for certain amounts of time. Like there's fast mimicking diets that are like 5 days long, I believe. And if, you do those a couple different times a year, so definitely not doing them every single day. If you do those a couple times a year, they do have benefits of like longevity, reduced cancer rates and stuff like that. But that is something that you're just doing for a very short period of time. Like I said, 5 days. The continual intermittent fasting where, like you said, you're fasting for 20 hours, eating for 4, I find that to be very restrictive, especially when we're setting examples for our kids at home and we're not eating when they're eating. And so, we don't want to send the message that it's healthy not to eat and consume food, because that can lead to disorders later in life. And, I want to encourage my kids to eat food, and I want to encourage them to eat healthy food. And so I want to be a good example for them. I feel like that's important. That wasn't something specifically I learned in grad school. I just think that that is important for us, setting a good example for, our kids.
Absolutely. And I think our brains, our bodies, like you said, nutrition is the vehicle for a healthy life. And we need gas every 4 hours, I'm going to say, some type of snack, whether that's a handful of nuts, a healthy meal, but without adequate nutrition and nutrients, it's really hard to be the best version of yourself. And,
Sure.
And I think that's great role modeling. One of the things, Ashley, that I come across when I'm working with different patients, I work with people across the lifespan, from kids to older folks from all different backgrounds, all different demographics, socioeconomic statuses. And one of the big barriers I hear probably 50% of the time for following a healthy diet is cost, which we've talked about. That is a huge concern for a lot of people and their ability to implement a healthy diet and eating into their families or homes. Do you have any recommendations, or can you provide some tips for feeding a family of 4 feeding them healthy meals on a budget?
For sure. And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it really does come down to planning, because if you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. That's the quote I was looking for earlier.
That's true.
I was like, it's gonna come back to me. But I think it definitely comes all back to planning. But there are definite tips. For those that aren't vegetarian or vegan, maybe have a meatless day, because it can be meatless Monday. Add that into your routine and eat more legumes or eggs, or add in some tofu, or instead of doing pasta, swap it for like a chickpea or a lentil pasta, and have your focus be around something that's more plant-based one day a week, because that can be cheaper than buying, especially organic meat. Again, going back to, if you don't plan, you plan to fail. Then my husband and I actually, on our phones, and now we've added our kids because they have iPads, we have a list that we share, that we share with the whole family. So whenever anybody needs something, they add it to the list. So I'm only going to the grocery maybe twice a week now, instead of like every day. And so that can be helpful, because you're going to the store with a list. You're not going to the store and just buying food. So that leads to less sporadic buys. If it's at all in your budget and it's something you want to focus on, just buying organic with the Dirty Dozen. And that list comes out every year. I think it's by the EWG, the Economic Working Group. And so there's 12 foods that they say these have the most pesticides in them. So just focusing on spending, if you do have the money, the organic versions of those, and then buying everything else conventional, like just regular, non-organic, to save money there. And then there's a list. They also have a list called the Clean 15. So those are the ones that have the least amount of pesticides that you really don't need to worry about or don't need to buy organic. So that's something. Another tip is buying frozen. we all kind of focus on buying fresh produce, but one, it can go bad. Two, how long was it in the truck to transport here, and how long has it been sitting on the shelf, and how many nutrients does it really have left? And so when you buy frozen, it is picked at its peak ripeness and frozen immediately. So you know that there's actually probably more nutrients in it than the fresh produce that you would buy. And making smoothies out of it, there's actually, I learned a couple months ago, you can roast frozen veggies and they taste really great. So that's like an easy thing. If you always have frozen veggies on hand, you always have a way to just pop them in the oven and roast them and throw it as a side with your dinner on top of a bowl. And then I always recommend going to the farmer's market, because even if it's not organic, a lot of them do have organic produce, but even if it's not organic, you know that it's going to have a lot of nutrients in it because it's local. It didn't travel far to get here. It's very fresh. So it's going to have more micronutrients in it than your peaches from Georgia, for instance, because they're, the fruits and veggies you're getting at a farmer's market are local, and they're usually much cheaper than you would get at a grocery store. So that's a great way to focus on getting some whole foods in that are really healthy at a lower price. And then there is this great website that I came across, because for those that don't know, about 31.9% of food that is bought goes to waste, which is about $1,900 a household.
I believe that.
So I found this cool website. It's called myfridgefood.com. So you go to it. And so my whole premise on this is eat the food that you have in your pantry, first, right? You already bought it. You've already spent money on it. So myfridgefood.com, you go to it, you put in what you have. Like, I have some chicken breast, and I have some broccoli, and I've got some potatoes, and I've got some rice, and it curates meals. And it's not just one meal. It comes out with multiple different recipes. Now, my caveat is that they're not always healthy recipes, so you have to choose the one that is going to be the healthiest for you and your goals. But it's really cool that you can just put in the stuff that you have, and then it'll throw you recipes based upon the ingredients that you have on hand.
That is absolutely brilliant.
So,
especially for families that stock up during sales, buy one, get one free, or they really beef up their pantry and having that option.
Yeah.
Not being wasteful.
Correct.
The frozen fruit option is brilliant, because that is such a common issue in our home. Is I can buy 3 cartons of strawberries or blueberries, and then after 3 or 4 days, if they haven't been eaten, they get thrown out. And to have that steady stream of frozen fruit and being able to roast the vegetables. I was able to roast some very fresh asparagus last week. That was delicious, but to have that option as well, to sprinkle a little bit of olive oil and pepper, fantastic. Sure. Absolutely.
And I'm from Florida, so my version of cold is different than other people's. So I don't do it as much during the winter in Florida, but in the summers I love a smoothie. So I try to not use any fresh veggies or fruits in my smoothie. I try to use all frozen, because then again, it's saving money, and then I know it's picked at its peak ripeness and all of that. And smoothies are a great way to get a lot of different micronutrients and foods in.
Definitely. I've got to say, though, it's funny, because it feels like an endless summer. Really, moving here from upstate New York, it seems endless, which is what I love. You're not sidelined.
Right.
You're really out enjoying that the sun always comes out every day, and that's a beautiful thing.
I'm born and raised in Florida, so to me there is a winter.
Yes. It does get down to like 59, and you can feel it. And I believe your blood thins a little bit living here from the warmer weather, so it makes you more susceptible to the fluctuations. But that was one of the first things somebody told me. Oh, we do get this seasons here in Florida, and I do see it now. I just think it's funny when it's taken to another level with Ugg boots and things like that, because that's definitely just for show.
Oh, yeah. It's just a fashion statement.
Yes, exactly. You are just such a wealth of knowledge. We so fortunate to have you here today, Ashley, and I cannot thank you enough for sharing your expertise with us. Ashley McIntyre, The Elevated Plate. Check it out, everyone. And thank you for listening to today's Brighten Up podcast on Your Brain on Food. Until next time, like the sunflower who faces the sun, remember to live on the bright side of life. Can you please share with our listeners specifically how they would reach out to you if they are interested in learning more from you or creating a personalized nutrition plan designed to improve their own or family members' overall mental health?
So my website is www.theelevatedplate.com. On social media, both Facebook and Instagram, I'm at the.elevated.plate. Always feel free to email me at, it's Ashley, ASHLEY, at theelevatedplate.com. And I would love to work with you. I do offer a free 15-minute discovery call so that we can make sure that we are a right fit and to make sure that, I think that I can help support you in your goals. And if it's not on a client basis, I do love to do community education, and corporate education. So if anyone's interested for that, I would also be up for doing talks based upon what they're wanting, to deliver to their clients or their employees.
Thanks, Ashley. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.